How's it going, my how-to friends? My name is Gary and this is my channel, Weakest of Weeks. If you're a first-time viewer, I appreciate you clicking on the video and definitely consider subscribing. I have a ton of how-to stuff out there and especially Saab-related videos. Now today's video we're going to be installing some injectors. If you've been following along with this project, this is my 2008 Saab 9.3 Aero 2.8 liter V6 turbo. Absolutely love this car. Near full bolt-on. And I was on the fence whether or not I wanted to do injectors or not. Well, lo and behold, spoiler alert, I talked with Brian at Vermont Tuning, who is going to be tuning the car, and he talked me into getting some injectors. Now, I will say he didn't give me any sales pitch or anything along those lines. It's just internally, I knew if I were to tune this car with stock injectors, eventually I would want to squeeze a little more power out of it. So I took the plunge head first and ended up going with these Bosch injectors that are flow tested. So this is going to be absolutely perfect and complementary to this car, and I'm super excited to get these installed and then tune it. So in this video, I'm going to cut to the chase. We're going to go ahead and install these injectors, and quite frankly, you can do the same process with any injectors, not just specifically these Bosches that I'm going to install. But I will say it's going to be a little more involving on these Aeros with the 2.8 liter V6 gas engines because you do have to remove that upper intake. Sometimes it's called a plenum. But I will show you, my friends at home, it's not that big of a deal and it's something you can how to from home. So let's go ahead and get started. To remove this upper intake, we have a bunch of different 13mm bolts along with 10mm bolts. For now, I'm going to remove them and leave them in place because a couple of these are size specific to where they go. With the 6 13mm bolts loosened up, now we got to hit up all these 10mm bolts. We have a couple for the coolant hose here, one up here, one right here. We got 2 for the engine computer. We have some stuff behind here for this plastic wiring harness, and there might be a couple miscellaneous other ones, but we'll get to that when the time comes. But for starters, we'll go ahead and go with this one. Have you kind of at a weird angle here on the back firewall. This is the engine computer. I'm going to go ahead and remove these other 10 mils. Go ahead and unplug this sensor. Let's push down on this tab. Gets it out of the way. This stuff is pretty loose now. Push in on this tab for this vacuum hose. That comes out. There's a 10mm bolt right here. You may get lucky and be able to maneuver the intake away from this coolant crossover tube. However, it's probably best to remove this additional 10mm nut over here. And how I'm going to do that is with this ratcheting 10mm wrench. Pretty simple. And then once we have this loosened up, I'll go ahead and remove both sides of these clamps and just be prepared that you'll probably leak out a little bit of antifreeze. At this point, you can easily kind of move this out of the way, but I have a special surprise for this. And then also, I don't really want to risk moving this in like a 90-degree angle, mainly because this is a pretty old rubber hose. So I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect it. To prevent this hose from leaking, I shoved a random bolt in there. You can obviously pinch this off if you want to. Next step, we're going to go ahead and loosen up this hose clamp. Now, I do have the DO88 charge pipes, but this process will be near identical for the factory plastic tubing. That intake off, we can kind of get a better look at what's going on. It's kind of neat. We have some Felpro gaskets here, and I don't believe these Felpro gaskets would have came from the factory. So I believe somebody at some point has changed these upper intake gaskets. Now there is a set of lower gaskets, and I'll show you here in a sec. But what we're going to do is remove a couple 10mm bolts. We need to remove this electrical connector. We're going to use the Schrader valve, unscrew this cap, bleed off some of the pressure that may be in this fuel rail. We'll go ahead and push this connector in for this fuel pressure sensor, because all of this is going to kind of come out as one, and we definitely need to figure out how exactly these injectors come out. But before we do any of that, I'm going to remove these gaskets real quick, and then I'm going to shove some towels down in here. That way we don't accidentally drop anything like this down into the engine and the valves. Gonna go ahead and bleed the pressure at the Schrader valve here. You'll see it kind of seeping out. That's why we have this shop towel to catch some of this. Now good to remove these 10 mils for the fuel rail. Injectors are kind of a pain to remove, so we need to get this gray clip up. And then this is the tricky part. We need to really push in on this gray clip right here, and then it will release. Kind of interesting. This one has like a little heat shield thing. I'm gonna try to lift it up out of the way. Oh no. Okay, so we lost a clip on this. Oh no, this one broke. Come on, brittle plastic, come on. With the electrical harness removed, that exposed one more 10 mil. Here's the part, if you really want to cheat the system and you're feeling kind of lazy, you can probably make do. You can undo every single clip for all 6 injectors, swing this fuel rail up, replace the injectors and swing it back down, lock them back into place with the metal clips, and put it all back together and call it done and dusted. However, I highly suggest against that because whenever you put this fuel rail back into place, you really want to lower it straight down so you don't risk tearing a O-ring for the fuel injector, because you're not going to know if it's leaking or not until it's all back together, and it's going to dump a bunch of fuel in this valley here. It's going to fill that up, and there's a lot of things in this engine bay that can create spark, torch your engine, worst case your car. So I'm going to go the extra mile here, try to undo this fuel clip right here, and then also a couple 13 mils because I don't think this lower intake gasket has ever been changed. So I need to definitely shot back out all the junk in here, and then I'm hoping I can raise all of this out to replace that lower intake gasket and safely replace the injectors without causing any potential leaks. It's definitely one case where these DO88 parts are just really in the way. Oh man. So I'm having some complications with this lower fuel line. Unfortunately, these DO88 charge pipes are less than ideal for this. And I've tried to snake a fuel line kit in here and I just can't release that clip. So my next goal is going to be to unclip each of these injectors, kind of lift this fuel line up to get this lower piece out. Not gonna lie, that fuel line down here really sucked to remove. Yeah, definitely gonna have some cleaning to do here. I know for a fact some junk got down in the valves, so I'm gonna have to really thoroughly clean some of that crap. For the injectors, the bottom side is clean, so before we put the injectors in, here's a quick comparison of the stock. I'm not sure the brand or the cc, and then this is the new Bosch that's going in, 700cc. You can see not only does it have a much longer tip to it, but it's also a different style connector, so we do need like an adapter harness, and it's pretty simple. So it will actually clip in like that, and then this will clip into the factory harness. It'll look identical to the stock Saab connector. And whenever we install these, we cannot install them dry. You definitely risk tearing the O-ring, folding it over, and causing future leaks. So a lot of people like to use some silicone. They like to use WD-40. For me, I prefer some good clean motor oil. We'll just go ahead and we'll wipe it along the edge. We'll wipe off the excess. And we'll do this to both sides. I'm going to transfer over the original metal clip, and this can kind of be a pain. So it is going to go like such. All right, so now we just need to do this 5 more times. Make sure you test fit the fuel line and the upper intake plenum just to make sure you have the proper orientation of it before you bolt everything down. One important thing you want to make sure is you don't have any old O-rings still in the fuel rail. To reinstall the 3 10mm bolts. Now for the adapter harnesses, the springs will face out. Not the cleanest thing in the world, but around the ports where the gasket mates to the surface is pretty good and clean. So now we have the new lower intake gasket. I'm going to install it dry. Some people like to put silicone, motor oil, some other stuff, but I'm choosing to just go ahead and use it as is dry. Now, one thing, mine had the tab to the right, and then these only go one way, they got to go up. So this, you can flip it around, but because whenever I removed the old one, it was to the right, that's what I'm going to stick with. So we'll set this in place. And then also too, I ended up cleaning this with some soapy water before installing just to make sure they were good and clean. Bottom of this surface is now clean as well. Now that I don't have a secondary air injection valve sitting here, I decided to bend this bracket out of the way. It's not something you can really easily remove, so it's just a hindrance more than anything. And if the valve was still here, you can kind of just push it back to the side, but that way we can really finagle this in here a little bit easier because it's kind of a struggle with the fuel line connector right there. Ready to install the 13mm bolts for this lower intake portion. We'll go ahead and start these two by hand, and then we'll torque them down to 17 pound-feet of torque. Made some progress off camera, bundled up the injectors and the injector harnesses with some zip ties. Pretty simple, but there's a lot going on here, a lot of wires and not a lot of space. So I wanted to keep everything compact, that way it doesn't move about and chafe on the metal intake gaskets and split the wires. Now I did off camera plug in the fuel line clip right there. I ended up replacing these two bolts. They were kind of rusty, so I replaced that. Along with that, I plugged in this fuel pressure sensor connector. Now we are good to toss on this upper intake plenum. If you think I'm going to reinstall this crusty upper intake, well, you, my friends, are mistaken. I have a spare intake that I've had kicking around for a while, and I decided to send it off to the ceramic coater. Had it ceramic coated in the same exact thing that is on the charge pipes and the down pipe. So the upper intake was done along with this coolant crossover tube, transferred over my throttle body, got a new throttle body gasket, cleaned everything up nicely. Now I don't know if there's really any performance gains with this, but it should help with heat dissipation. Let's face it, it looks a heck of a lot better than that thing. So while the intake is not very heavy, it's quite an awkward procedure to get this thing back into place. For me, I just thought it was too much of an abdominal workout, so I ended up hopping inside the engine bay. I was struggling to get the intake tube onto the throttle body, so I took a little bit of soapy water, put it around the throttle body, a bit into the intake tube to kind of finesse it a little more into place. And well, I decided to hop out of the engine bay to kind of get a better angle of it, and well, you'll see what happens next. Well, that was graceful. Longer bolts go in the middle. I guess you could call these shorter, but not really. These go in the front. And the two shortest ones go out the outside edges. Now these 6 upper intake bolts also get torqued down to 17 pound-feet of torque. That is officially a wrap on installing injectors in your Saab 2.8 liter V6 turbo engine. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to be starting the engine in this particular video. I definitely want to throw the tune on it first, because once we start this thing up as is, it's going to dump a whole lot of fuel in the engine, which is kind of unnecessary at this point in time. Hence the tune. So stay tuned for that video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about this one, drop a comment down below. Make sure you give the video a like if you enjoyed it. And definitely stay tuned and subscribe for the upcoming tune video plus more. So with that being said, I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you friends next time.